Hello everyone, this is Drake, and today I will be presenting the first part in a series. And I'm going to be naming the series something like The Great Literary Traditions of the World. And the first part of the series, which is what you'll see today, will be Histories. Histories of the Great Literary Traditions of the World. Now, a couple points to make. So first of all, the format of this video was inspired by my video I made on Renaissance epics and romances, Italian Renaissance epics and romances. And I framed that one as more or less of a timeline where from the left to the right you went over time, from the earlier times to the later times. Now this one is going to be geographically arranged and somewhat diachronically arranged, meaning like, over time. But what I've done is I've put the books where the greatest peaks of the traditions existed. And I'm pretty lucky that I didn't really have that many overlaps as far as, where a book would go here or there. So just a quick scan of what we're going to be doing today. So as you see on the left-hand side, we have Native North America with Vine Deloria. We have the 15 poets of the Aztec world, Mayan literature, and then that little sliver of carpet there is the Atlantic Ocean. We have a history of Latin literature in the Middle Ages. We have Roman literature, Greek literature, African myths, Arabic literature in the middle here, some Sanskrit, the dark blue and red volumes, Chinese up there, and then Polynesian. All right. So I'm just going to go through the books, give a little bit of a description of why I think it's interesting, why I have the particular copy, and then move along at a fairly brisk pace. And like I said, this will be part one. I will also be discussing philology in each tradition, poetics, and then texts in the original language from the major traditions, okay? So starting in the Americas, or Turtle Island, as I prefer to call it, we have Vine Deloria Jr., The World We Used to Live In. This is an anthology that Vine Deloria Jr. collected, and I agree with Huston Smith. This book is a priceless addition to the history of humankind. He collects many primary sources, oral histories, written histories of, firsthand accounts from the medicine men themselves or descriptions about them. But many are firsthand accounts. And it is just some of the most insightful and wise writing you can ever stumble across. So highly recommended. Next, we have 15 Poets of the Aztec World by Miguel León Portilla. So he's one of the great scholars of Mesoamerican ancient culture, really, going from the past till its influence on the present, philosophy, poetry, history, culture, all sorts of things. The most famous poet in this collection, the most notable, is Nezahualcóyotl. And so I'd highly recommend, if you end up looking into this volume, I would check him out. And then our last one here in this column is an anthology by Dennis Tedlock, 2,000 Years of Mayan Literature. And this is published by the University of California Press. This one is Oklahoma, and then this one is kind of a smaller press. So 2,000 Years of Mayan Literature. As it says, as the British would say, it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's an anthology of Mayan literature collected by Tedlock. As you see here, learning to read early Mayan writing, but then also it includes major works like the Popol Vuh. And Tedlock also does indeed have a full edition of the Popova, which I would strongly recommend to pair with this. But I have this specifically. So these are anthologies, and most of the rest of what you'll see are histories. And I think that emphasizes an issue that we have in the Americas or Turtle Island, where at least to a comparative degree, not implying that these traditions are all necessarily connected or equal or clumped together, but I wish that we had a history of, kind of a philological history of the Americas, where it covered the languages, the literatures, in addition to the culture. I would just be so thrilled with that. It would have to be multiple volumes, but I think a Cambridge or an Oxford or a University of California or whoever, somebody could put it together. Oklahoma even maybe could do part of it. And I think we're really missing something like that, because really, like, compared to what I'm going to show, especially the North American, especially like plains traditions, and then the woodland traditions. The woodlands would be like east of the Mississippi, plains would of course be west of the Mississippi. Those traditions are fascinating, and you could do so much important work with those. And then of course the Aztecs, extremely significant, Central Mexican, Mesoamerican culture. But then the Mayans are the real heavy hitters here. And I think, even if we had a really substantial history of Mayan writing or history of Mayan literature from a philological lens, I think that would be amazing. Now, personally, I am missing, indeed, below here would go a work on the Incan literature or Quechua literature, and I don't have anything there. So if you know of any good recommendations, whether in English or Spanish, please suggest one. All right, now we are going to hop across the Atlantic Ocean, that is rather thin now, to European literature. Now, I'm going to go in chronological order here, so I'm going to scoot over geographically to A History of Greek Literature by Albin Lesky. This is put out by Hackett, and as you see the translators there, this is the authoritative history of Greek literature. It goes from the oldest times, which covers Homer and Hesiod, and it goes all the way through the Alexandrian period, the Hellenic period, with people like Callimachus and the Library of Alexandria, and then I don't remember how far it goes, but I think it goes through Nonnus, the Dionysiaca, which would be the early centuries AD. But Albin Lesky, this is the authoritative history of Greek literature. You can find it. It's been reprinted many, many times, so it shouldn't be too hard to get a hold of. And even the sections on Homer are very insightful. It's about 800 pages, so it really does what you need there. And this is one of the ones I've had the longest out of all these. All right, now we'll go next in chronological order to A History of Roman Literature by Michael von Albrecht. And as you can see, this is volume 1, and this is volume 2. It is indeed published by Brill, and so it is not cheap for these, over 2,000 pages of history. Michael von Albrecht specifically modeled this work after Albin Lesky's History of Greek Literature. This History of Greek Literature was so important that von Albrecht gave himself the task of mirroring it and making a work as substantial that covers Roman literature. So this is Roman literature. It's not just Latin literature. So it goes from Livius Andronicus, who is, about 300 BC or so, to Boethius, who is about 500 AD. It does not continue into the Middle Ages or post-classical period. But nonetheless, it is still extremely substantial there. And one thing I will say about this copy, this is pretty hard to get a hold of. Of course, there are digital copies you can relatively easily get a hold of, but this specific copy I had to smuggle out of Canada. Now, I didn't smuggle it out of Canada. The long story short of what went on there is I was looking for copies. I found there was a copy for $300 up in Canada, and that didn't do me any good. But then I have a habit of when I see a book listed on Amazon or AbeBooks or eBay, if it looks like it's from a reputable bookstore, I always check to see if that bookstore has its own website. And this is kind of a book buying tip for any of you out there who are like me and obsessively look for good deals on rarer books, especially scholarly works. Often what you'll find, because Amazon and AbeBooks and eBay charge a fee on top of selling the volume, let's say there's a bookstore that's been around for 50 years, they're likely to have their own website. And of course, if they sell a book on their own website, they don't have to pay the on-top fee. So very often a bookstore will give a discount on their own website. And indeed, this particular book was at a substantial discount at this bookstore that was in Vancouver. So I tried to buy it. It was more than half off. I'll say that. And I tried to buy it, and immediately the bookseller saw I was an American, didn't want to sell it to me for that price. The $300 price was the American price, or anywhere in the world outside of Canada. But luckily, I have a book dealer up in the Vancouver area. You know, he's a good friend, but I was very pleased to be able to visit when I went up to Vancouver. And he was very obliging and was willing to pick this up for me and smuggle it across the border through the Canadian Postal Service. And got all the way down to Texas for me. So I'll have another story like this as we get further to the east, and I'll give my kind of cohesive thoughts on this when I get down there. But anyway, thank you very much, Matt. I couldn't have done this video without you. Michael von Albrecht's History of Roman Literature. All right. Last but not least, in Europe, we have another masterwork of scholarship. This is Max Manetius. Let me try it. Geschichte der latinischen Literatur des Mittelalters. It's a 3-volume work, so you can see over 3,000 pages, a history of Latin literature of the Middle Ages. And this is the masterwork. Of course, it's in German. It has not been translated, but I doubt it'll be translated, frankly. And so I went ahead and just got the German version. It begins with Boethius. This work was written before von Albrecht's work, but they go amazingly well together. And von Albrecht's work was written in German originally, and then it was translated into English, and this is the Brill publication of the English translation. Fortunately, Manetius has not been translated yet, but you might know the names Ernst Robert Curtius and E. Robbie. So they both credit Manetius's work with being vital for their own work. So European literature in the Latin Middle Ages is Curtius's work, and riddled throughout, you will see references to this work by Manetius. So a vital work of scholarship if you're interested in the history of world literature. Even if you're just interested in the history of, Western literature or European literatures, this is an absolutely vital work. So highly recommended there. Also, if you can't read German or you're not interested in this one, Robbie does have 3 volumes. One is called Christian Latin Poetry, and the other one is a 2-volume work called Secular Latin Poetry. And they are both directly inspired by Manetius, and those are both in English. So those would be the second best from this. And I wish I had gotten them down from the shelf, but anyway, I didn't. All right, next, before we move further east, we have a Penguin volume on the African myths of origin. Unfortunately, similar to Turtle Island, we don't have especially good histories of African literature, at least in English. And there are a couple others that are out as far as anthologies of, let's say like Swahili or a variety of other literatures, but I don't have them. But this is what I do have. And it is quite expansive. It does cover quite a lot of ground in a volume that's relatively easy to get a hold of. The Tuareg of the Sahara, I need to look at that. But yeah, this is holding it down here for my African histories. The reason why I included anthologies such as this one is because often I think anthologies can do a good job of showing, translations of primary texts that work as a sort of anthology. And even some of these anthologies do work as samples of translations of the works that they cover. I'll get to that a little bit more as we go more to the east, because the Roman literature and Greek literature don't really do that. The Latin literature does to a degree, and then of course those three are anthologies, so that is what they are. They don't really cover history too much. And this one, of course, is an anthology of older literature, or literature. And again, just to make it obvious and clear, I'm using literature in the broad sense of, I'm not saying text, but of course these are texts to the extent that they were written down and translated. But I know many of these are written versions of oral traditions, and it's always a tricky situation to start writing down oral traditions because, for example, with something like the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were out of a live oral tradition, and every performance was unique and tailored to the situation. So if you happen to write down one specific performance, that doesn't necessarily imply that that performance is the most authoritative performance. And so it's a tricky situation there. But nonetheless, with that being said, I do view oral literature as literature, even if it's not written down. But of course, I wouldn't be able to access it if it wasn't written down. So we do the best with what we're able. All right, keep it moving. So next, we will be getting into Arabic literature. And Arabic literature deserves a brief explanation here too. So Arabic literature specifically refers to works composed in the Arabic language, or translated into the Arabic language, I suppose, for some narrow cases. I will begin here with the history, my history that I have. This is Nicholson's Literary History of the Arabs, published by Cambridge University Press. So this originally comes from 1907, and I'll show you a little thing here that's kind of neat. So this picture here is cool, but then there's this overlay. So this is 1953. And this works both as a history and an anthology, because Reynold Nicholson, who was a major figure of early 20th century Arabic scholarship, knew that when he introduced these works to students who had been educated in, Western schooling systems or European or American schooling systems, they had basically no knowledge of what went on for 1,300 years in the Arabic-speaking world or the Islamic world. So he's giving this as more a cultural history, but a cultural history through the literate history. And as you see here, this is what it covers. It does a really good job of the earlier periods, and then kind of gives a cursory look at the what is called also post-classical period, from the Mongol invasion to the present day. But this is an excellent starting point if you want to get into a history of Arabic literature. All right. In addition to that, I do have two anthologies, both very recent. We'll start with the anthology on the right, because this anthology on the right is in conversation with Nicholson's anthology, or history. Nicholson calls it a history, but it really does both pretty well, both history and anthology. The one on the right here, Penguin Anthology of Classical Arabic Literature, it is an anthology, but done in historical, like chronological order. So it starts with the oldest period, the pre-Islamic mu'allaqat and other pre-Islamic poetry, goes through the Quran, and then goes through the rest of classical Arabic literature. It's kind of a guided anthology. It doesn't just give you the texts, but it'll give you, let's say 5 pages of setup and explanation of the time period and what the text is going to be, and then it'll give you pretty good sampling of texts. The one on the left here is, I believe, the first volume published in this NYU classical or Library of Arabic Literature, which is amazing. Since I've been learning Arabic, I've been really fully appreciating what this library is. Amazing. So definitely check it out if you haven't. And Geert Jan van Gelder, inevitably I said that wrong, but he's a Dutch scholar. He was the professor of Arabic at Oxford for about 20 years, from I believe the late 80s to the early 2010s. And so he did the selection and the translation of this anthology. This anthology, again, ranges from the pre-Islamic literatures to, basically the early 20th century, the post-classical period, maybe late 19th century, but anyway, it's pretty expansive. What I also appreciate about this volume on the left here by Gelder is that he doesn't only translate what you might call like aesthetic works, so like poetry and romances and certain tales and this kind of thing. He also translates grammar, works of the grammarians of the Arabic world, who are some of the most sophisticated grammarians and philologists that we've had in human history. Notably, this literary criticism here, Al-Jurjani. This will come up in part 2 of this series. Popular science, an encyclopedia, fairy tale, erotica, lyric prose. So just truly amazing. So I would recommend, if you want to start with a single anthology, get this one. It's a little bit more expensive than this one, but not extortionately so. And then if you want a literary history, this is the most affordable, but there is a newer Cambridge literary history that I believe is 6 volumes, but each volume is $50 to $100. So if you want to throw some money at that, definitely that's the one to get. All right, we will continue moving east. We will get to 2 histories of Sanskrit literature. So the first one here, I will show first. This one's I have to be a bit delicate with it. It was printed in 1927, as you can see, by the University of Calcutta. This is volume 1 of A History of Indian Literature by Maurice Winternitz, who's the professor, as you can see, of Indology at the German University of Prague. These are the Vedas, national epics, Puranas, and Tantras. And as you can see, this was translated from German into English, specifically for an Indian audience. Now, what is fascinating about Winternitz in this specific volume is that Winternitz was friends with Rabindranath Tagore. And as you know, Tagore was heavily involved in the Bengali Renaissance, notably around the region of Calcutta. And Winternitz, like I said, was friends with Tagore. And Tagore, if you look up Winternitz on Wikipedia, there is a picture of Tagore sitting with him in 1926, the year before this book was published. So I don't know the specifics, but I can only imagine that Tagore was somehow involved in the publication of this volume, which is almost 100 years old now. So I feel very, very fortunate to own this and to have it as a prized possession of my personal library. I was able to order this from Houston, Texas. I don't know why this was in Houston, Texas, but I am grateful that it was. So that is volume 1 of the history of Sanskrit literature, and that's more of covers the Vedic period and then the earlier period of the major texts. This next one here is by A. Berriedale Keith, A History of Sanskrit Literature. This is not a multi-volume set. Well, in a way it is. This is the literature, and then he also has a volume on Sanskrit drama, which I don't have. But what this covers is the Kavya literature. So as he says here, as opposed to Vedic literature, the epics and the Puranas. So that's why I have the 2 volumes, because the one I just mentioned does cover that. This one, let's see, contents. It covers Kavya literature. So that specifically means, belles lettres, or the court poetry, especially. And notably, we have Kalidasa, who's, of course, extremely important, maybe the most important court poet of Sanskrit. And then it goes to Bhairavi and Magha. Both have been published by the Murti Indian Classical Library. And then other figures like Jayadeva, who are published by the Clay Sanskrit Library. And then you have anthologies and so on and so on. So I'll go back to the cover page here. So History of Sanskrit Literature by A. Berriedale Keith. And also you do have a history of Sanskrit drama. So recommended there. Oxford University Press. First edition from 1920. All right, we are closing in on the end here. Move further east here, and we have the Cambridge History of Chinese Literature, edited by Kang Yi-sun Chang and Stephen Owen. Now, this is a 2-volume work, one of these amazing Cambridge histories. This one was done in the early 2010s. I'm thinking 2013. I may be slightly off there, but as you can see, volume 1 covers from the earliest period, meaning like the Zhou dynasty, the Confucian classics, all the way up to 1375. So that's towards the end of the Yuan dynasty. And then volume 2 covers from 1375 to the present. And it even covers like digital literature from the 1990s, early 2000s. So totally expansive. And 2 things that I love about this anthology history that other literary histories of Chinese literature don't do. This one does proceed chronologically, which of course a history would do. That would be reasonable. But it mixes all of the different genres. And one reason why I think that is absolutely vital is because in the time periods, the genres were mixed to the degree that if someone was reading poetry in the Han period, they were also reading essays and histories and philosophy from the Han period. They wouldn't have, read the poetry on its own and then read the other stuff on its own, 500 pages later in a literary history. So the other major literary history that you can find would be maybe Victor Mayer. That's published by Columbia. That one is split up by genre, which I think is it's not terrible, but it's clunky. That being said, that volume is easier to get a hold of. So that would be my starting point. If you want to get into a history of Chinese literature, this would be my end point, apart from actually learning Chinese and delving into the amazing works there. So Cambridge History of Chinese Literature. And then I also have my favorite anthology of Chinese literature, and that is co-edited by John Minford and Joseph Lau. This only gets you to the Tang Dynasty. I think they were working on a second volume that would cover from the Tang Dynasty, which would be, early 900s AD. Well, that's when the Tang Dynasty ends, till, I guess, roughly the present day, but it never got put out. I am patiently waiting, though, for when they put it out, because this is by far my favorite anthology of Chinese literature at all. All right, and then last but not least, I have an anthology of traditional poetry of Polynesia. So that covers all the way from, let's see here. Let me see if I can get the table of contents going for us. So it starts in the east, starts in Hawaii, and then goes to Samoa, the Society Islands, Easter Island, Cook Islands, Tuvalu, and New Zealand. So not strictly, but it kind of goes east to west. And one of the things I like about this anthology is because it treats the poetry as art. It doesn't treat it strictly as legends or mythology, which necessarily there's nothing wrong with that, but there does tend to be kind of like a removal of agency. If you know some of these people were coming from obviously a colonial European perspective, so to call something a legend or a folk tale could have been a diminution of what actually was going on. So what Marjorie Sinclair did here was to take it as like conscious aesthetic works, this poetry of Polynesia, which covers an amazing span of time and space. So I would recommend that. And this was published by the University of Hawaii Press out of Honolulu. All right, so that is the end of that. Oh, my funny story about this one. So Chinese literature, this 2-volume Cambridge set, I have a friend up in Seattle who let me know that this was up in a bookstore there at the Longbros bookstore. And it was for a very good price, way better price than I'd seen online. So I thought it over for a few days, decided to cut back on food for a few evenings and ordered this, and very, very glad I did. So my kind of, closing thought is, now, why would you want to cover so much of the world with literature? Well, partially curiosity, but also partially because I think that one of the only ways you can argue that humanity has actually progressed is, I think, expanding who we view as our in-group, or who we view as a vital part of our moral universe. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to see that people across the entire span of the world, going to this old 2,000 years ago in the Mesoamerican Mayan sphere, all the way through to Polynesia, who themselves got all the way to what modern day Chile is, about 1,000 years ago, around the same time the Vikings were getting to North America, Newfoundland. It is all connected. It is all deeply connected, spiritually connected, and for this specific relevance, aesthetically connected. And to make that even a finer point, for me specifically, without friends around the world, I could not have learned about all this stuff or gotten a hold of that 2-volume set of Roman literature and this set of Chinese literature history. So that's my overall takeaway. And like I said, this is part 1 of, I believe, is going to be a 4-part series. So if you like this, let me know if you're interested in the other ones. And also, if you want further in-depth coverage of any of these volumes, I'd be happy to make that. All right. So that'll be the end of this video for today. And death is a gang boss.